Dr. Rachel Levine is a pediatrician and adolescent medicine specialist who served as Assistant Secretary for Health in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in the Biden administration. When nominated for this position by President Biden and confirmed by the Senate, she became the first openly transgender person ever to be confirmed to a federal office, a position she held from 2021 to 2025. During her tenure, Levine was also sworn in as a 4-star admiral in the U.S. Public Health Service, another historic first. As Assistant Health Secretary, Levine dealt with many issues encompassing public health, health equity, and the administration's response to the COVID pandemic, the biggest public health crisis of the last 100 years. But it was her identity as a trans woman and her support for gender-affirming care that made her a target of intense personal and political attacks. This, in a time of deep partisan divisions in this country over transgender Americans and the role of public health in our nation's life. In 2025, after leaving office, the Trump administration took the extraordinary step of replacing Levine's name beneath her official portrait at HHS with the name she was given at birth, an act that's commonly referred to as dead naming, and which transgender people often view as insulting and disrespectful. Today, I talk with Dr. Levine about medicine and public health, about her own journey as a trans woman, and about what a lifetime of breaking barriers has taught her about leadership, resilience, dignity, and courage. Dr. Rachel Levine, welcome to Profiles in LGBTQ+ Courage. It's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
I want to talk with you about a lot of things. You've had this illustrious public sector, public leadership career, and want to get into that. But I want to begin by talking about how you got into medicine in the first place.
Sure.
Before you took on public sector roles, you were a pediatrician.
That is correct. So my interest in medicine started in high school. I very much enjoyed my biology classes, and that really drew me to consider medicine as a field. Now, my family is a family of lawyers. My mother, my father, my uncle, then my sister, my cousin, my niece, and now my son all went into the law. So my adolescent rebellion was to go to medical school instead of law school. Tulane was wonderful. I had an excellent medical education. And in your second year, you start to see patients in a supervised way, of course, in a course called physical diagnosis. Then there was a rotation where you could see children. And I thought, this is where I belong, seeing children and going into pediatrics. And then finally, in my last year of medical school, I had the opportunity to shadow an adolescent medicine physician, a pediatrician who saw teenagers. And I thought, this is the niche for me. And so when I did my training at Mount Sinai in New York City, the goal was to do pediatrics and then to do a fellowship in adolescent medicine. And that's what I did.
Which wound up being so central to the role you later took on as Assistant Secretary for Health during the Biden administration around the whole issue of transgender healthcare. But we'll get to that in a moment. But tell me how you went from private practice to becoming the Physician General of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
I really wasn't in private practice. I was in academic medicine. In New York, after finishing my training at Mount Sinai, I stayed on faculty at Mount Sinai. I also had an association with a practice, and I had an association at Lenox Hill. So I was really doing a bunch of things for about 5 years. And then I decided to leave New York. Now, some people say my biggest transition was going from 80th and 1st in Manhattan to somewhat rural central Pennsylvania. And that's saying something, given the transitions I've had. So, we went from a one-bedroom apartment to a house with 2 cars in central Pennsylvania. And so I was at the Penn State College of Medicine. I was there at Penn State College of Medicine from 93 till I went into the Wolf administration in 2015, so for almost 20 years. So then I was very ensconced in academic medicine, very involved with clinical work, and very involved with clinical research, education, administration of my programs. And I had this amazing opportunity to become one of the co-chairs of the Transitions Committee for Health for Governor-elect Wolf after he was elected in November of 2014. I had been on the board of Equality Pennsylvania, LGBTQ Equality Pennsylvania, and also on the board was someone that was high up in his campaign. And so she asked me to co-chair the Transitions Committee. Every department has a committee for the transition from one administration to the next administration. So I did that, but I said, I'm not giving up my day job. So I worked on that transition all through end of November, December, and the beginning of January. So now we're January 2015. And then there was a discussion, would you like to be part of the administration? And I never thought of going into public service. But within a week, I started to think about it. I talked to my mentors at Penn State, all of whom recommended I not do this and not leave academic medicine. But, I met the chief of staff, I met the governor, and when they called me, I said, yes, I will be the physician general of Pennsylvania. That was on a Friday. It was announced on Saturday. I saw patients on Monday. The inauguration was on Tuesday. And on Wednesday, I walk into the Department of Health. Now, the physician's general role in Pennsylvania is somewhat similar to the surgeon general's role. But I did ask that since I was, in my view, giving up so much, could I be, I wanted a seat at the table. I wanted to be a member of the governor's cabinet. And they agreed. So when I arrived at the Pennsylvania Department of Health, one of the biggest issues facing public health in Pennsylvania was the opioid crisis and overdoses. Again, physical issues, behavioral health, and mental health issues. So I dived right into that. And that was one of the focuses during my time as the physician general and then later as the Secretary of Health.
And during this time period, were transgender health issues arising as a concern as well in the Commonwealth?
LGBTQ health issues. Yeah. So really, as a prominent LGBTQ member of the cabinet, they asked me to spearhead LGBTQ issues in general for the administration and particularly public health. So we actually formed a policy group, an LGBTQ policy group involving not only the Department of Health, but all of the departments. And we would meet monthly to discuss not just health issues, but other very important policy issues for LGBTQ people, of course, including trans individuals. The time was very different then. So when I was confirmed by the really overwhelmingly Republican state Senate. I was confirmed unanimously.
Is that right? In Pennsylvania?
In Pennsylvania in 2015. Yes. And so there wasn't the severe rhetoric and discrimination that we're seeing now. So it was a different time, and there was growing acceptance of trans people and non-binary people in our community and around the country, even in purple Pennsylvania.
Yeah. So you were nominated by President Biden to become the Assistant Secretary for Health, and that was in 2021. When did the administration first come calling to see if you'd be interested?
So I had gone from Physician General to Secretary of Health of Pennsylvania, starting in the summer of 2017, was confirmed twice to that position, almost unanimously, and dealing with opioid crisis, but many other public health issues. The secretary sets the policy and the budget for the Department of Health. And then the world changed in 2020 with the acute phase of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so I led Pennsylvania's response under the governor for COVID-19. President Biden was nominated, and you have to fill out a form if you're interested and, send a CV. And then I really didn't hear anything. And he was elected. I was anticipating, hopefully, some sort of call for some position, but I didn't hear anything until the beginning of January. And then literally got a text at 10 o'clock at night. Would you be interested in a position in the Biden administration? Yes. Talk tomorrow. Next day, I'm offered the position of Assistant Secretary for Health in the Biden administration. I accept, and then you have to go through the vetting, which was fun and interesting. And then it was announced the day before the inauguration.
Yeah. And you were nominated and you went before the Senate to be confirmed. What was the environment in the Senate at that time? And Do you recall the vote by
Yes,
which you
I
were
do.
confirmed?
So it was interesting. It was challenging. So as we've been discussing, the world changed in terms of our community, and particularly trans and non-binary people. And make no mistake, this was a specific strategy from conservative think tanks that they could not break our community now in terms of marriage equality. That was settled. So where could they split our community? Where could they attack our community? And they decided to attack it on gender identity. And they discussed that and developed a specific strategy and playbook to attack our community in an iterative fashion, first with trans athletes, then with gender affirming care for youth, and then attacking the broader trans and non-binary community. And you can see that play out starting in 21 through our present day. So in 21, it was somewhat tense, particularly with certain senators, certain Republican senators that were extremely difficult and attacking in their questions.
Yeah.
Now, you don't just walk in cold to these Senate confirmation hearings. I was very well prepared by the Democratic Party and the Biden administration for this hearing. I did my hearing with Vice Admiral Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General, so we had a hearing together. But I was overtly attacked. But I had, I had a plan and a playbook, and I had a strategy of how to deal with those questions. And I was approved by the committee and then by the Senate 52-48. I had, in a bipartisan fashion, I had 2 Republican votes, and of course, all of the Democratic votes. And
who were the 2 Republicans? Do you remember?
Murkowski and Collins.
Okay.
Who voted for me.
Not a real surprise, maybe.
Well, I was grateful for their support.
Yeah.
And so I was confirmed and then sworn in as the Assistant Secretary for Health.
When you become the object, the target of people's personal attacks, how did you prepare for that, and how do you avoid, well, you're a physician, so how do you avoid letting your limbic system be triggered?
Yeah. So, I really was not attacked until COVID. And then, with many public health figures, both in local public health, state public health, and federal public health, I was attacked for our mitigation methods that we tried to do to control the spread of COVID-19. In the acute phase of the COVID-19 pandemic. And those attacks became quite personal. I really wasn't attacked as overtly before. I mean, I didn't really read the social media a lot, but I was not attacked in the public. So what I fell back on is what I've learned during life, but particularly during my clinical training, is to compartmentalize. So if you're a pediatrician and you're in the emergency department at Mount Sinai Hospital or at Penn State, and this desperately ill child comes in, I mean, that is just a high stress situation. It's a child, the parents. You can't react with, as you said, emotionally with your limbic system. You have to compartmentalize your feelings and bring your professional self to bear, and then do your work. And that's what I have learned to do. And so I did exactly the same, as I was able to compartmentalize any emotions about the attacks and focus on my very important work for public health for Pennsylvania and then for our nation. And so that's what I did.
So as Assistant Secretary of Health in HHS, you were suddenly making decisions really for millions of us, millions of people. And now we see public health under attack as never before, distrust in public health as never before. What have we learned, and what can we use going forward to remediate the image of public health in the future?
There is going to need to be so much work to rebuild the public health infrastructure of our federal government whenever the tide turns, whenever the wheel turns. And one thing we've learned is that it's so important for local public health, state public health, and federal public health, and international public health to work together. So, of course, resigning from the WHO severely interferes with that. And many of the cuts that they've made among personnel at HHS, including at the CDC and NIH, all that interferes with that coordination. So we need to rebuild that infrastructure. We need to rebuild the public health workforce for the federal government. Now, with the change of administration to the Trump administration, of course, I resign and I leave, right? I'm a political appointee and my advisors resign and leave, and that's how our system works. But with DOGE, they fired thousands and thousands of dedicated public health professionals who were part of the full-time staff, civil servants, who were outstanding public health professionals who had been in the first Trump administration and then were in our administration and were fully expecting to serve honorably in the second Trump administration, and they were fired and furloughed and let go. And so that has really damaged my office. It has damaged many other offices, including the CDC, the FDA, the NIH, and that workforce will have to be rebuilt. Now, all of that rebuilding, reimagining and rebuilding is going to take time and effort, and we will need to be up for the challenge.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Tony Fauci, your colleague,
Yes.
who we know, of course, is under attack now by the Trump administration. I presume have you been in touch with him? Or
Yes.
And what's his take on why has it become so popular to demonize public health?
Well, my being in touch is just to offer my support. So I don't know his mind right now. But I can tell you that Dr. Fauci is an outstanding physician, an outstanding public health physician, and a dedicated, professional who really has dedicated his entire life to the health of our nation. And I support him.
Yeah. And what do you make of this undermining of public health and the vaccine skepticism? I mean, why are we regressing?
Sure. This is a real conundrum and challenge now, which was not true during the first Trump administration. With the current MAHA, Make America Healthy Again administration that they have at the Department of Health and Human Services, they are really, through many measures, undermining and damaging the public health of our nation, and nothing more than with vaccinations. Now, as we've talked about, I'm a pediatrician. Nothing is more important to our children's health and the health of our nation than vaccinations and immunizations, which are really one of the victories of public health in the 20th and 21st century. From polio administrations to eradicating smallpox from the world, polio, pertussis, which is whooping cough, diphtheria, measles, mumps, rubella, which is German measles. I'll give you an example people don't think about, which is HIB, H-I-B, Haemophilus influenza type B, which is a bacteria. Now, when I was a resident, in the 80s, would cause meningitis and epiglottitis and sepsis and pneumonia. And safe vaccinations have virtually eradicated that in the United States. And all of that is being undermined during the Trump administration with their vaccine policies. And it'll take years to rebuild the public's trust in safe and effective vaccines for children, adolescents, and adults.
Gender-affirming care for minors nowadays has become one of the most contested areas of medicine and politics. How do you separate what might be legitimate scientific questions about evidence, risks, and long-term outcomes from the political efforts to stigmatize transgender people?
So, as I mentioned, this is part of a specific strategy that has developed through conservative think tanks that has been implemented in our nation. And one of the victims has been what I call transgender medicine for youth. There is a long, several decades long history of evidence-based transgender medicine for youth. Now, people would often ask, what about prepubertal kids? Well, prepubertal kids they're before puberty. So there is no, they might have counseling, but there is no medical treatment for prepubertal children. There would be counseling, but there are established protocols to treat once puberty starts, developed first in the Netherlands and then developed through Boston Children's Hospital and then other children's hospitals throughout the country to treat youth who are transgender and to do a very careful analysis of those kids, to have a lot of mental health questioning and support, almost always be with their family to provide this care. And it is evidence-based. The standards of care have evolved from, in the last 10 and then 20 years as the standards of care have evolved for diabetes or depression or really any other conditions. And so the rampant attacks against the whole field, I think, is wrong and unconscionable and politically and ideologically motivated. Should we do things better? We always want to do medicine better. The standards always evolve and change depending upon research. We always individualize care to the young person and their adolescent and their family, as we did with eating disorders, as we do with any other condition. And this care is mostly provided at our nation's expert children's hospitals. Boston Children's Hospital, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, UCLA Children's Hospital, and Seattle Children's Hospital, and more, by pediatricians and pediatric specialists. So if you have a child with an endocrine problem like diabetes, then you're going to want to be seen by the endocrine specialist, the pediatric endocrinologist at your closest children's hospital. If you have a child with severe depression, a teenager with severe depression, you'll want to see the child psychologist and maybe child psychiatrist at that hospital. If you have an eating disorder or maybe an adolescent gynecological problem, you're going to see the adolescent medicine specialist at that hospital. Well, it's the same people that are in the gender clinic at the children's hospital. It is exactly the same. Adolescent medicine specialist, child psychiatrist, child psychologist, pediatric endocrinologist, adolescent medicine specialist, exact same people providing the gender care.
Yeah.
So why they are competent to provide all this other care, but it's somehow woke to be providing this other care, this transgender medical care, doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Yeah. And that is why I stood with Jesse Ehrenfeld, who was the previous president of the AMA, and we said we do not want politicians involved with this type of medical guidance, with this type of interfering with medical protocols and standards of care. And we don't want that for heart disease. We don't want it for diabetes, and we don't want it for transgender medicine.
Yeah. You've talked about the evolution of the field of medicine, of transgender healthcare specifically. I'm curious, since COVID and since your time in federal office, how has your own point of view about transgender healthcare evolved?
My review is the same as it was before. I mean, we're under political attack, and right now there are many trans and non-binary youth that are under attack, as well as their families, as well as their medical providers. And I think that is unfair and unconscionable. And again, it is being dictated by political and ideological purposes. So my view is the same, is that it needs to be evidence-based. It needs to be very carefully done. We need to watch for any side effects or any young people that are having difficulty. And as we do with every medical condition, it really is no different than any other medical condition. We need to continue to have research, and we need to continue to get better.
I was talking with a nurse friend of mine this morning about this interview, and she brought up this issue of surgery. And I know this is a particular hot flashpoint in this discussion of transgender healthcare. What is your own feeling about the protocol? For those not familiar with it, what is your view of the appropriate protocol for counseling, pre-transition surgical guidance? Can you kind of lay out what the timeframes and
the protocol was developed again in the Netherlands and then continued in the United States and many other countries, where all the young people would have psychological evaluation. Other comorbidities with their depressed, etc., need to be treated. And when appropriate, at the start of puberty, they would see either the adolescent medicine specialist or the pediatric endocrinologist. And then usually what are called hormonal blockers, pubertal blockers, would be prescribed to stop puberty, to continue that counseling, to let that counseling continue. The reason to stop puberty is that for a young person who goes through a puberty that is not consistent with their gender identity, it makes it extremely difficult. So at the appropriate time, according to the whole team, the psychological team, the medical team, the parents, and the young person, then they might start hormonal therapy, and the young person would start to go through her puberty consistent with their gender identity. And then that would proceed over the course of several years. And then at the right time, on an individual basis, surgery might be considered. Most surgery is for young people 18 and older. But all this care does need to be individualized. And so that treatment team with the family and the young person should decide that. But most surgery was reserved for those 18 and older.
Yeah. It seems to me that there's so much disinformation out there today. And I'm thinking of the statement that Donald Trump made about the child going to school in the morning as one sex and coming home as another sex, which I think is abominable.
Yes.
How do you combat the kind of wide-angle spray of disinformation?
Well, so, I mean, this is an issue in public health in general, but also particularly for transgender medicine and the LGBTQ plus community. I think that we're going to need patience and persistence and perseverance. We need to start from the ground up. We need to start with talking to, school board by school board and county commissioner by county commissioner. It needs to be granular. It needs to come from the ground up. And then I think that pediatricians can play a very important role in that as experts in child and adolescent health and public health. And I think that pediatric professionals, as well as family physicians, can play a very important role with that. And then I think that, as our country continues to evolve and grow, things will get better. I am forever an optimist. I am a positive and optimistic person. Some of that is my nature.
Yeah.
But some of that is a choice. I choose to get up every morning and to be positive and optimistic because that helps fuel my work. It helps fuel my energy to do the work that I need to continue to do, and we all need to do, to improve the health and well-being of people in our nation. And if you give in to darkness and despair, then that doesn't fuel the work that needs to be done. Now, I'm human and we all have our moments. But then the next day you get up and you fight harder and you work harder to work for the common good.
Well, and that's a great segue into talking to you about what happened to you when you left office. And in 2025, of course, the Trump administration went out of its way to change the nameplate on your official HHS portrait, and they dead named you. So, a couple of questions here. First of all, can you tell us how that felt, and can you explain to people who might not know the term dead naming what that means to a transgender person?
So they call me by the name before my transition, and it's considered inappropriate to do that and insulting to do that.
If I may, I've heard people describe it as an insult, as abuse, and even in one case, assault. So where does it land for you?
It is an insult, but be honest with you, I was bothered by it, but I wasn't overwhelmingly emotionally bothered by it. I thought it was really adolescent of them. It sounded to me like middle school. Yeah. Is that you're going to take a Sharpie and cross out my name and do that? And I half expected them to draw like a mustache and a little beard, So it really seemed to me to be petty. And that's just how I approach it. I don't really have any other comment.
And for young transgender people today who might not have the resilience and the positivity that you bring, what's your advice to them?
Well, so my advice is that we live in very challenging, difficult times now. And I absolutely understand that. And I want to help them as much as I possibly can. And I want to motivate others in our community, again, to help all those vulnerable in our community. For example, there is no one more vulnerable than transgender women of color who are not just at risk of harassment or bullying or discrimination. They are at risk of violence and murder. And we honor them, their memory, during the Transgender Day of Remembrance in November each year. But trans youth, non-binary youth are really bearing the brunt, as are their families, as are their medical providers. So we need to support them in every way possible. And I understand to my bones how difficult things are for them. And I truly feel that us all working together, our community, our rainbow family, standing together, that things will improve. I can't predict the future. I can't tell exactly when they're going to improve, but they will improve. So they need to stay strong and resilient. Our community, our broader LGBTQIA plus community, has always faced challenges. And we are a strong and resilient community. We are stronger together, and we will be successful.
I've interviewed quite a number of transgender folks for the podcast series, and I've asked most of them this question, and I'll ask it of you. When did you know that you were transgender? Can you talk a little bit about your early experiences?
Well, so I'm going to be 69 years old. So when I was a young child at, say, 5, we're talking 1962. So what I remember is that I felt that somehow I should be female or girl. And I remember a Superboy comic strip where Superboy meets a girl alien and is somewhat snarky to her. And she turns Superboy into Supergirl and Clark Kent into Clara Kent.
Is this right? Was this a real?
Oh, you can find it on the internet.
Wow.
And, that goes on for a number of days. And eventually he kind of apologizes and she turns him back. And I remember looking at that to myself, of course, going, well, that's what I want. How do I do that?
Yeah. To be Supergirl.
To be Supergirl or to be a girl.
Yeah.
But there was no language for that. And then I was a child. But as I grew older, especially in my adolescent years, now we're talking the 70s. What would you say? Who would you tell? So, the counselor at my school, so I went to the Belmont Hill School, which you're in Massachusetts, as you know, is an all-male prep school, which I loved. Belmont Hill was great. And I've been back there to speak. But the counselor was the crew coach. What were you going to say? So, I compartmentalized that and compartmentalized it for decades. But I always had a secret, which is not great for your mental health to have this secret. And so, I started to slowly come to grips with this in my 40s and then eventually transitioned in my 50s. But, my first memory was at age 5 with Superboy and Supergirl.
Supergirl. And, last week I interviewed Colonel Bree Fram.
Oh, I know Bree very well.
And I had a lovely interview. I sat with her in her kitchen and we talked about, among other things, her book, Forging Queer Leaders, where she talks about how the experience of being in the closet and then navigating organizations and social systems and then having the courage to come out, it prepared her. She talks about how many LGBTQ plus leaders developed this muscle to deal with adversity because of what they struggled with internally.
Yes. Well, I think that's true. Also, again, I was an adolescent medicine specialist that saw young people struggling with many different issues, including their body image and things like that. So every challenge you have is an opportunity. And then every opportunity obviously presents its challenges. But I think I was able to grow as a person, and I think that the challenges that I had helped me grow. And I think all of that fuels my enthusiasm for working towards the common good.
Yeah.
And working to help people. I have felt so gratified by my career in medicine and public health because truly all I've really tried to do is to help people. First in medicine, with patient care, but also clinical research and teaching and all that. And then from a broader perspective, with a broader brush in public health. And so what career could be better than that? I just spent over 40 years trying to help people.
Yeah.
I'll rest on that.
So what are you doing now in this next chapter of your life?
So I'm doing 3 things, but the most recent exciting announcement is that I will be a senior fellow at the Carr Ryan Center for Human Rights at the Harvard Kennedy School.
Okay.
So I'll be spending a year working at the LGBTQ program at the Carr Ryan Center for Human Rights at the Harvard Kennedy School. So that is very exciting. I also do public speaking, and you know how hard it is to write. So I'm writing a memoir, and
good for you.
It's a work in progress.
Yes. So just a couple more questions, but really wonderful conversation here. So you have very graciously offered to write the foreword to the book I am writing, called Profiles in LGBTQ plus Courage, which is going to be based in part on many of the interviews I do for this podcast. And I'd be curious to know if you have a leadership philosophy, because I am an executive and leadership coach, and I often work with people who are dealing with or navigating crucible experiences.
Right. So my leadership philosophy and leadership style is to be facilitative and to be almost like a coach. And you need to be authoritative if you're a leader, but not authoritarian. And I try very hard not to micromanage people. I choose really good people for the positions. We set goals and objectives and then let them do their work. And then when they, when they've made some progress, then we come back and look at it. If they're having trouble, then they come talk to us about it, but not to micromanage them, not to look over their shoulder too much. And so it is facilitative, it is coaching, it is compassionate, it is friendly. Yet it does have to be authoritative, and you have to make sure that people are going in the right direction. If not, then you need to redirect them.
And how have you found it beneficial, helpful to manage through conflict with other people? How do you sit across the table from somebody who might disagree with just, transgender, what's that?
Right. Well, so, always with respect and compassion. You don't know how they are and what their life has been, and you haven't walked in their shoes. And so I think it is always important to work with other people in a respectful, calm, compassionate way. Yet, there are disagreements, and so sometimes we're going to disagree. Sometimes we're going to agree to disagree. If they're someone that works for you, then in the end, if you can't come to a meeting of the minds, then sometimes people have to leave. So, someone said, as a leader, you do have to learn to hire and fire. And I think that is exactly right. But usually, but not always, you can come to a meeting of the minds. If it's a debate, then you want to have a respectful, calm debate, on policy and procedures and things, and that's fine.
You were the first ever transgender person, I believe, to have been confirmed by the Senate for a senior federal role. And you also are a 4-star admiral. But it's not like you command ships or troops in a military sense. Yes. So tell us what being a 4-star admiral is about.
So one of the absolute honors of my position, the Assistant Secretary for Health, under statute from the 1960s, is that the Assistant Secretary for Health is a 4-star admiral in the Public Health Service Commission Corps, which is a uniformed public health service in HHS, ultimately under the leadership of the Secretary of Health and Human Services. The 3-star admiral is the Surgeon General. And the Surgeon General and the Assistant Secretary for Health work together on strategy and policy and procedures on all aspects of the Public Health Service Commission Corps. We have the only uniformed public health service in the world. It is a national treasure that most people don't know about, with over 5,000 dedicated medical and public health professionals that work throughout our country and internationally for public health. They work at CDC, NIH, FDA, my office, and more. They provide much of the care at the Indian Health Service in the Indian Health Service facilities throughout our nation. They work at the Federal Bureau of Prisons. They deploy to areas that have public health emergencies. And they are absolutely fantastic individuals. And it was a true honor to lead them, and very special to take my commission in the uniform in the Public Health Service Commission Corps.
Yeah. Well, I've asked you a lot of questions over the last 45 minutes or so. Is there anything that's kind of percolated up from our conversation that I haven't asked you about directly, but that is salient to this conversation?
Well, I just want to end with a message of hope, because I think that in terms of many challenges that our nation faces, none more than now, both in foreign policy and domestic policy, I really want to end with a message of hope. And in light of the topics of this discussion, for the LGBTQIA plus community, for our rainbow family, for vulnerable transgender individuals in general, trans youth, their families, their medical providers, things are going to get better. And the wheel will turn. And we have to show patience, but we have to be persistent and to keep going with our work. And that work will fuel the change that our nation needs right now.
Dr. Rachel Levine, thank you so much for being my guest today on Profiles in LGBTQ plus Courage. A true pleasure to talk with you.
Well, thank you so much. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's interview. Founded in 1973, PFLAG is the first and largest organization for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people and their parents, families, friends, and allies. We have over 400 chapters and more than 200,000 members and supporters nationwide. Our members come from every generation and live in cities, small towns, and rural areas across the United States. PFLAG is committed to creating a world where diversity is celebrated and all people are respected, valued, and affirmed. For more information about PFLAG, explore the rest of this website or visit PFLAG National at pflag.org.